Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Real Woman NZ. Now, before I bring in our guest, before I introduce our guest tonight, I just want to explain why it's me on my lonesome tonight with our guest. We have Bronnie, who is still down south with her family, so I'm fairly certain that Bronnie will be back with us next week. Now, I know that today there's been some sad news around some people who lost their lives, and we had a loss as well last week with a student in the caves. However, closer to home, it's unfortunate and sad for me to say that ASEAN actually lost her partner last week. So for tonight, ASEAN won't be with us. She might be out there watching, but I know that today is a difficult day for ASEAN. So if you are watching ASEAN, our thoughts are with you. And and I'm sure that the audience as well will be. Maybe they'll put some messages there for you for later. But yeah, just to explain to the audience why ASEAN isn't with us today. So without further ado, I will talk about who our guest is tonight. And our guest, Bob McCoskrie, is the founder of Family First New Zealand, about 2006, although maybe I might have the dates wrong, but I'm fairly certain it's 2006 he founded Family First. Almost 20 years of defending and lobbying for strong family and safe communities. Now, Bob has been an educator, he has been a social worker and a talkback radio host. Now, Bob lives in South Auckland, and without wasting any more time, I'm going to welcome in, and it's my pleasure to bring in Bob. Hello, Bob.
Hi, Helen. How are you?
Wonderful. I'm just making sure that I've got the questions up over here. Already got a comment. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Charmaine. So, Bob, it's so nice to have you with us today. We know that you're a busy man, so we appreciate you coming on. Now, it's interesting the way that I met Bob. I'll just share that. I don't know if you remember, Bob, but we met in a bar. Now, it's not as sus as it sounds. So the story behind that is I did talk to Bob a fair bit before we met in the bar, and that's because we met with a small group of people in a bar opposite Parliament. So I was very naive. My first introduction to politics was from Bob's help, actually, because I had put the petition to Parliament, and then there was a small handful of people who tried to have me deregistered in the Teaching Council. Bob heard about that. I'd never met Bob before, and he jumped into my aid, really, and sent a letter off to those people and to their employers. And from there, the Teaching Council did not do anything further. So he's been really valuable in that space. And for the last 4 years, I've been following Bob as well with all of the stands and lobbying that he does. So he's a real inspiration to me. Do you remember that time that we met, Bob, in the bar?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I tell that story quite often because for those who don't know, Helen did a petition that is actually one of the largest petitions on the government website, 38,000 signatures, I think it was.
Oh, it was over 40 actually, Bob, but close.
To stop gender ideology being targeted at young children. I think Ron DeSantis would have signed it if he could have, but it was one of the largest. And so this group of activist teachers sent this threatening letter to Helen, basically saying that what she was doing was unconscionable and she was bigoted and phobic and every unprofessional term they could use. And so I read the standards of what's it called, the professional standards for teachers, and basically I wrote to the principals of all the schools that those teachers came from and said, one, why is your staff member denying a person a democratic right to run a petition? And two, why are they acting so unprofessionally towards another professional just because they disagree with them? And Helen, I think we got, one principal or two principals might have said yes, replied and said yes, they dealt with it. and acknowledged it. The rest of the principals didn't say anything, but it went quiet. And it was a reminder. I use it as an example of where we need to learn to push back respectfully, but push back, because for too long we've sat back and we've been silent and we've been railroaded. And it's time we actually stood up for the principles we believe in, because of it's about protecting our young people. Helen, just before we get into it as well, let me just clarify for everybody that I am not a woman. I will never be a woman. I can never be a woman. And I'm a big supporter of Real Women New Zealand and other groups like Speak Up for Women and Posey Parker and any group that says that only women can give birth, and you cannot just say that you're a woman. It's a special gift. And so, I'm on your side. Actually, my blog today, I don't know if you saw it, but it was actually an interview with two ladies down in Invercargill who are fighting to protect the women's changing room at the local public swimming pool.
Interesting that you mentioned that, Bob. Interesting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the end as well, because we have you jumped in, but that's okay. No, Bob, you may not be aware, but I also had a meeting here at Christchurch City Council last year, but I'll share that a little bit further down the track. So, sure. And I'll go and have a look at your blog as well about that. Yeah. So honestly, that was an interesting experience for me back when we first, started to communicate, and that has obviously helped me to realize, on my journey, that we can push back and we can stand up. And, even as parents, that's what we're trying to actually empower them, to let them know that these are your children. You have the rights. They do not belong to the state or our education system. And there were times as a teacher that I used to think that the teachers had too much control over children. So that has to change. Now, earlier today, actually, thank you for mentioning about that you support us. It's so good to know that you're a male and not trying to be on here pretending anything else.
No.
But we are, it's a pleasure to have you here as a male. So thank you.
Well, my wife always tells me that I'd be the ugliest female in the history of women. So to just stick with biology.
Wow. I might get into trouble for this, but some of those out there who are identifying as women are pretty ugly. So anyway, look, earlier today I talked about freedoms, and that, freedoms that are valuable to me: speech, thought, and belief, and how we must be able to debate, partake in robust discussion to defend those freedoms. Now, just before I continue, I found something today, Bob, and now I know you don't know what I'm about to share, but we talked about roughly almost 20 years you've been with Family First. Is that right?
17. Yeah.
17. Okay, so I found an old clip of you today. I just happened to have a quick look to search, and the very first thing that came up was something from 2004. So I'm going to share it, and there's a good reason why, especially around where are we? Share screen, especially around freedoms, and you'll see why shortly. Hopefully this is going to work. Share my screen. Just bear with me. Where are we? That one there. Okay. Just bear with me. You'll probably remember shortly. Do you remember this?
Of course, at the beginning of what was political correctness, and people thought it was a joke in the 80s, and it's really turned in to being the scourge of society. It is the beginning of telling people that having an opinion and voicing that opinion is dangerous, that there's too high of a price to pay to comment on controversial social issues, whereas in fact, the only way that will make us to grab. The left, of course, wants is for people to not judge, is to not ask questions, is to not say, wait, I want something better. And the best way to do that is to make it dangerous to speak out. And when it is, Bob, dangerous to speak out, it also becomes dangerous to think about these issues as well.
Can we just define, you use the word left. I mean, we hear the statement, the left and the right. What do you mean by that?
Oh my gosh.
For me, it's very specific. And I identify, yes, it could mean something very different to everyone who's listening to this. For me, coming from the left in America as part of the feminist establishment leadership with the National Organization for Women, it's also Black Power civil rights groups, the Urban League in America, the ND, it's gay and lesbian rights groups. In America, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation is an example. Now, These are groups led by an elite. It is not representative of the average homosexual, the average authentic feminist. It's very few people who are the most damaged, with the most to gain by victimhood and isolation, who get fabulously rich and get a lot of power by maintaining victimhood and really relying on a constituency that victimhood. Without it, those people would probably be selling shoes.
Okay, but
Wow. I'm just trying to get back to where I am.
Shocking.
Stop sharing the screen somehow. There's so much in there, and we're going to address some of that. Now, that was 19 years ago, and what on earth how far have we come since then? Talking about
the interesting thing is that,
having an opinion is dangerous.
Yeah. Tammy Bruce is now a Fox News contributor. She is lesbian and was based in California. She was involved with the National Organization for Women, and I think the reason she got involved, she was head of the chapter in California, and I think the reason she left National Organization for Women was because a woman got assaulted or attacked or something, but it was by a black man, and so the National Organization of Women didn't speak up because it was critical theory. In fact, Tammy Bruce is into critical theory way before most of us knew about it. The group basically said, because the perpetrator was black, we're not going to speak up, even though the victim was a woman. And she realized that actually the ideology was getting in the way of protecting women. I mean, it's a little bit like what we saw with Posey Parker, that when someone comes and speaks up for women, that if the intersectionality isn't correct, then Posey Parker is the problem, not the violent response. And Tammy Bruce, is amazing. So she speaks up against basically critical theory, and I think she speaks up against the radical LGBT movement that, is not about live and let live. It's about indoctrinating and starting as young as possible and getting drag queens into libraries, etc. That's a terrible haircut I had, though. Gosh.
I thought you'd like that. I must admit that's why I chose that one first, because I saw you and I thought, oh my gosh.
Well, see, I was doing breakfast radio at the time, so I'd probably been up since 5 o'clock, so that's my excuse.
No, you've got heaps of hair, and it's like amazing how when 20 years what we look like. But anyway, moving on, she talked about having an opinion is dangerous. Now, I just want to quickly share something. I wasn't going to do this tonight, but after hearing that, and it's 19 years old, and look where we've come from there. So sharing an opinion, we talked about my petition before. All I did was share a petition because it was my opinion that this was harmful. Since then, I now feature in this book. I don't know if you've seen it, Bob.
Yeah. I haven't read it because I really don't want to waste my time, but I can just imagine.
So the only reason I read it is because somebody told me that our party was in there. So I thought, I better see what they say. Anyway, I read one chapter on our party, and then for some reason I decided to have a look at a few other chapters, and I actually feature in 3 chapters here.
Wow.
It's quite horrific in what I'm featured in, but I won't go further into that because that's for another time. But I just found it, crazy actually, that she's talking about having an opinion is dangerous, and now look at where we're at. You speak out your opinion, and this is what happens. You're labelled, and we could talk further on that whole disinformation project stuff, but that I think will be another show. So. The good thing is, though, the good news is I'm encouraged with the alternative media that is coming out now. So, for example, RCR, Reality Check Radio. Yep, you've got the platform with Sean Plunkett. You have, alternative written media where it's BFD. They publish all our stuff. Now, also, even these online panels, I know that every Monday you have a show on every Monday. Yep. And we're here every Tuesday now, and it's kind of it's quite refreshing, isn't it, that people can, instead of turning on TV, you can actually come and watch your show on a Monday night, watch this one on a Tuesday night, and know that you're not just being fed one source of information of propaganda. You're going to get a real good balance of information and a lot of stuff that the media, mainstream media, will not talk about. So it's it's pretty good. Now I'm going to start with I've got a question here for you. Actually, I've got about 4 questions, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. Cool. I'm sure there'll be some comments put through to you as well. Now, the first one, let's start with freedoms, because that's what we were talking about. Freedom for parents. The first few questions are going to focus on parents, okay? And then we'll change tactic a bit. So for parents to raise their children without state interference in a healthy, loving home environment, last year, when Minister Chris Farfoy was asked this simple question in a radio interview about conversion therapy bill, they asked, is it okay for a parent to say no to hormone blockers for a 12-year-old who wants to change their gender? Now, Chris was unable to clarify if it was right or wrong under that new conversion therapy law. At that time, parents, as you probably are aware, were concerned that the bill would drive a wedge between them and their children. After discussing this with a local parent here in Christchurch, something that occurred between her and her own child, because the school her child was going to helped the transition from her daughter to a male. Now, that's exactly what happened. That wedge is exactly what happened when parents are ousted from parental responsibility. So what are your thoughts on how parents can protect their trust relationship with their children regardless of what is going on in their schools?
Well, I mean, the problem is that it started well before that particular legislation. In fact, I think it started with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which basically failed to acknowledge the role of families, the role of parents, and created the child as basically under the state's guard and watch and care rather than, parents being involved. And then, of course, it was exacerbated by the anti-smacking law, which, it wasn't about having the right to thrash and bash your children. It was nothing to do with that. We actually want that to finish. But what it did was, in effect, it basically said to parents, you can't tell your children what to do. And what kids understood was that parents, you can't tell me what to do. It went way beyond actual violent physical abuse. And since that law was passed, in fact, the rates of serious child abuse have not decreased. In fact, they've got worse. So once again, the politicians come and they want to be seen as doing something, but they basically, what's the saying? They smash the nut with a sledgehammer, and they're dealing with a problem. Now, with the conversion therapy, the problem is that they said they were dealing with a problem, which was electroshock treatment and ice baths and manipulation of people. The fact of the matter is, we asked the Human Rights Commission, actually, is this going on? How many complaints have you had? And they'd had one informal complaint in the last 10 years. It simply wasn't happening. What it was about, and I think parents need to understand, is that it was effectively saying that if your son wants to identify as a girl or your daughter wants to identify as a boy, for a parent or a counsellor or a youth worker or a teacher to advise against that, to push back and say, no, you were created male or female, biology will always win. For you to do that meant that you could be committing a crime. And so that's why Chris Farfoy didn't answer the question, because the answer was, of course, yes, it is illegal. He went away and he thought about it. He came back a couple of days later at the Beehive, and he fluffed around basically saying, oh, it's such a high threshold and it's got to go to the Minister of Justice, I think, for final Solicitor General for final write-off. But that doesn't change the fact that it's still illegal. And so what it's doing is that it's saying that a parent who affirms the biological sex of their child could be committing a crime. It's just a crazy law which doesn't achieve anything. And in fact, it stops children from getting the help that they need, because now what we're finding is that the research is starting to be done on this experiment we've done on children with puberty blockers and wrong sex hormones and, cutting at healthy body parts. And actually professionals around the world are actually saying, hang on, this isn't what we should be doing. This isn't actually solving the problem of the dysphoria and the self-harm tendencies and the mental illness. But for New Zealand, they just keep pushing it. They subtly say, one minute they say puberty blockers are completely reversible, and then suddenly it disappears from the website, and they're not fully reversible because we know they're not. In fact, puberty blockers don't delay becoming transgender. They actually predict becoming transgender. And there's actually an article in the latest Listener. The Listener seems to be one mainstream media, Helen, that seems to be willing to allow an open debate on this particular issue. Stuff certainly doesn't. Most of the mainstream doesn't. But the Listener is publishing articles from academics, including Otago University, who are saying chemicalizing and castrating healthy young people who are simply struggling with their self-identity is not the answer, and we should heal the mind. My argument, my comparison has always been, look, how do we deal with young teenage girls who have anorexia nervosa? Their mind says that they are overweight or fat. Their body is actually dangerously skinny. They're starving their body. They're harming their physical self because their mind is thinking wrongly. Now, what do we do in that situation? Do we send them in for liposuction? Do we give them weight loss tablets? Do we say, yeah, okay, you're not having dinner tonight because we want to help you? No, we don't. We solve the physical problem by healing the mind. And yet, when someone is thinking wrongly about their biological sex, for some reason we have to buy into that ideology. And that's all the conversion therapy was doing. It was locking children into transgenderism. It's a really dangerous law. And we're just having to monitor it to see who's going to, unfortunately, be one of the first test cases. We've got legal lawyers ready to go on this issue. It will happen, but it's made it had a really chilling effect, especially for pastors and youth workers, but even for parents. Just how far can they go?
Yeah, interesting that some of the things you're talking about. There's many places now who have banned the gender ideology from the schools because there wasn't enough evidence around the affirmation only. And you're right, it's a psychological issue that needs addressing, and we're not actually doing these people any good by not addressing that. And in fact, obviously the conversion therapy is closing that down because there's, I've seen a lot of accounts overseas where therapists are too afraid, counselors are too afraid to talk about it because they know that they're going to be, arrested, criminal. I mean, the thing is, with conversion therapy, it was already in the Crimes Act, wasn't it? So, it's like...
So I think the worst part about the law was that it also took away consent. So if someone seeks counselling out of their own free will to deal with unwanted sexuality or gender confusion issues, that is not a legal defence against criminalising the counsellor or the parent or the youth worker or the pastor or the counsellor. I mean, that's shocking, to take away that ability to be free to live the way you want to live your life. But I think, what we need to understand is that it's not really about conversion therapy, because, by the way, Helen, conversion therapy is still legal in New Zealand. It's happening in our classrooms every day with groups like Inside Out.
Yes, I'll get to them. Conversion
therapy is okay if it's in the direction.
We'll get there. No, absolutely. But you're right. It's for people who are going through a phase or going through something, even with experimenting with sexuality, which lots of people have in the past, and there's lots of accounts. I even know people who thought they were gay. Well, actually they weren't at the beginning, and then they thought they were, so they went off and had a few flings, and then they realized that it was just an experimental thing, and now they've got their own children and happily with their partner or happily married. So yeah, I mean, how are we helping people like that? We just, like you said, locking people into an identity. It's like we're really quick now to label people, label them, and it's like everything about yourself is has to either have an identity with gender or race. Okay, and it's like, why are we so quick to put everyone into this label of this? But look, okay, we'll move along to also sticking with parents. Inside Out, that leads us on to Inside Out. Inside Out's funded by 6-figure government grants to write sex lessons for schools, including Christian schools, persuading vulnerable children with radical gender concepts. Like you said, you know, who's actually converting people here? We've got the schools themselves will be allowed to express only a principle or belief without discussion or debate. So in these sexuality guidelines, you've got affirm, whereas in the curriculum, the national curriculum, most of the goals and learning intentions are critically think. You know, we get children to critically analyze, but there's none of that in this one here. Now, so this is a one-way street called Discrimination Alley, yet ironically, everything that Inside Out organization are pushing is a campaign is supposedly addressing discrimination. What do you say to parents watching who want to raise their children without this kind of state mind control, especially from lobby groups?
Well, the first thing that parents need to understand is just how covert it's all been. And the feedback that I'm constantly getting is, gee, Bob, we never knew this was going on until we read some of your material. That is a common thread, had it today even. And so we've created a lot of resource and are researching things like Mates and Dates and the family planning program Inside Out. And so you can go to sexeducation.nz and that has the fact sheet, which really shows you exactly what the curriculum contains, and you will be shocked by what you read. So that is sexeducation.nz. And then you can go to sexualityeducation.nz and you will see an analysis of the relationships and sexuality education curriculum. And it shows that it's not just about sex education classes. They're trying to integrate radical sexuality and gender ideology into every subject, geography, even maths, English, anything that they can. And so therefore for parents to say, well, I don't want my kids to sit through the sex education, the problem is that it's rife through a number of subject areas, but it's survived because it's operated in the darkness. And so we want to encourage parents to firstly read some of the background information that we've provided, and then we've put together a parent guide, which is on our website, where you can find out what does the law say, what are your rights, and how to respectfully approach schools and start to speak up, because you got to remember that most schools are run by a board of trustees, and the board of trustees is a group of parents. And in fact, they are likely to reflect the community values. And I mean, that was the one interesting thing about this Invercargill group that has pushed back against the changing room at the local pool at Invercargill, is that actually the mainstream understand that there's a problem here and we need to use some common sense, and children shouldn't be exposed to some of this adult type material. But they've got away with it because they just don't, they're supposed to consult with the community, but a lot of parents haven't got involved in that process. And I think parents need to, I think we've trusted schools and we've trusted the Ministry of Education for way too long. I believe the Ministry of Education is hostile to families. And in fact, I'm starting to see that commentary come from teachers like yourself, Helen, who are saying that, I mean, I heard it just last week with St. Cuth's, the principal saying that they were involved in the curriculum development and they just felt that they were totally ignored by the ministry. This is senior teachers. Now, the good news is that most schools are not adopting this radical. And I mean, Inside Out don't go into that many schools because most schools want nothing to do with them. But every parent needs to check with their local school as to what they're doing, what groups they're allowing in, and what programs they are using. And then if they are using some of this dodgy stuff, this radical stuff, push back. And if worse comes to worse, withdraw your child for the days that those are happening, and do a field trip. It'll be far more productive and less damaging. And most of the other kids will be jealous because they're not keen on sitting through those classes either. I mean, we saw that example up north in a, what was it, 12 or 13-year-olds, where they were given out a sheet that contained all the different types of sex. And, you know, the defense was, oh, this was a rogue teacher. Well, it wasn't a rogue teacher. The teacher had actually just been to a family planning training weekend and, in fact, had this sheet pre-approved by the head of department or the senior teacher. So this was no rogue teacher. This is exactly what they want to do with children. They don't understand that children have a moral innocence and we should be protecting that. All they want to do is sexualize them and indoctrinate them with this gender ideology that you can choose 112 genders and 200 plus sexualities. And so kids are wondering whether they're a boy or a girl. Are they actually the opposite sex because they're slightly different to their mates? They're wondering which sexuality do they fit into. And they realize that if they choose a sexuality that's not heterosexual, then suddenly they become part of a minority group, so their status increases. And then we wonder why our kids are so stressed. I know why it's stressed, because as this influence has increased, so too have our stress levels in schools, and social media obviously are pushing it as well.
Oh, I agree. And I'm actually writing a bit of an article about that right now. Look, you talked about trust, and I started writing that down straight away. And it is trust. It is because parents used to think, okay, we're sending our kids to school. You wouldn't have questioned. You wouldn't have a thought in your mind, oh, are they going to be safe in that environment today? Because we didn't have this kind of political experimental stuff, you know, these lobby groups coming in. You know, like I said, in my early days of teaching, I did actually I only got involved in teaching because when my oldest went to school, I thought, oh, I want to know what's going on. So I started parent helping and, you know, in the classroom. And then I thought, oh, you know, I quite like this. But, you know, parents want to know what's happening for their kids, but you do have that trust. Not now. Okay, I do not believe there's that same level of trust. And in fact, I have advocated to parents to homeschool. And that's not because I don't respect some of my colleagues. There's great teaching staff out there. Like you've said, there are great school leaders. There are some, however, who are pushing this. There are some who have, not that they have an agenda, but they are quite happy, very liberal and progressive in this way to push this stuff. And but yeah, the ministry, it's coming from the ministry. And I've had many parents who have contacted their schools. Even a few weeks ago, one of the parents sent me through the letter that the school gave to them. They made it very clear that they were not going to teach gender ideology. And there's lots of schools like that. But I did talk last week about how the ministry are trying to take it out of teachers' hands and bring in facilitators. Now, you talked about, where are we? Family planning and all of that with the gender stuff. Now, family planning, I don't know if you watched, but last week I shared the sex book from year 10, and it was put out by Family Planning 10 years ago, Bob. 10 years ago. Here I was just 4 years ago stumbling across this thinking, oh, wow. But, you know, when you're full-time teaching, you know what it's like. We're so engrossed in doing our job and looking after our students that we kind of miss what's going on out there and aren't always aware. You know, one of the principals actually phoned me and asked me, are we supposed to be teaching this? He didn't even know because he had not had, the ministry hadn't sent it to them. So subtle, you know, with this, obviously there's a few schools that are doing more than others, some of them far too much. But rainbow groups, look, Pink Shirt Day's coming up this Friday, isn't it? Pink Shirt Day?
Pink Shirt Day is another day that I think, you know, it's an example of where it's well-intentioned. Everybody thinks it's about anti-bullying and we all want to deal with bullying. And kids are getting bullied for various reasons. It's not just about whether they're around their sexuality or whether they're more feminine or masculine than the others in their peer group. It's also because of acne and because of looks and because they're not doing that well. And it's also because maybe they're too bright and they're brighter than everybody. And so they're, you know, and it's because of their race. So I think everybody is wanting to deal with bullying, and that's what most schools are doing. But Pink Shirt Day is all around just homophobic and transphobic and biphobic bullying, and the funds raised is going towards radical groups like Inside Out, and we simply look. I think if you really want to know why Pink Shirt Day has lost its way, it's because the face of Pink Shirt Day this year for an anti-bullying program is the guy that led the bully veto, Chanel Lull, against Posey Parker and whipped up that huge hysteria, which saw Posey Parker assaulted and saw that woman punched in the face. That was just tone deafness by the organisers, but that's where they think that the agenda of pushing sexuality and gender is more important than actually speaking up and protecting a woman who simply wants the right to speak up for women. So go figure. I did see in your comments that somebody asked about, is it compulsory? It's not yet, but if Labor gets back in, I wouldn't place a bet on it not being compulsory. And to be honest, I'm not sure that National's going to hold the line either. So no, it's not compulsory yet, and that's why most schools don't want a bar of it. And that's why whenever you hear people calling for compulsory education, it will always be the groups pushing the radical sexuality and gender ideology. It's not groups that are really concerned about key things like simple things like consent and about positive relationships, about delaying sexual activity, go figure. It's not drug-free type groups. It's not groups, about showing respect for the other sex. It's actually ones that are pushing the radical gender ideology.
Yeah, look, Bob, you said it's not compulsory yet. Now, I did hear that. I heard the 2 or 3 ministry women talking when I first put that petition through, and like I said, they want to make sure that all schools are doing this, because they're well aware that some are not. However, a lot of parents have pushed back, and I encourage them to keep doing that, because that does matter. Their voices will be heard, and like you said, voting, this year's election is so important. If we continue to have Labor here who are quite happy for this to be pushed even more, and even National, when I spoke to somebody from National, they were quite happy with what was happening. So they're not opposition at all. So it's really important to think about who you're voting for this year, and not just people who are jumping up saying, oh yes, we oppose that. Well, what have they done? What have they actually done about it? I haven't seen any of those smaller parties even. None of them have approached me to help me to share this. I don't know if you're aware, Bob, I've got a citizens initiative referendum out there. We need to have 300,000 signatures. None of them have bothered to, and they know it's there. They know it's there. So, just hope that people, voters out there, will be considering, what have people actually done about this. A lot of questions and comments. Thank you, audience. We will get through to them at some point soon, but there's just so much to cover off here first. I think that, Pink Shirt Day, you're right. Most of the logos, everything, it's all rainbow stuff, and but it's not even all about all the rainbows, mostly the trans, the real radical trans agenda that's being pushed. And you mentioned before that although it's not mandatory and not many schools are doing it, I think there's a few more than a few now, but not just that, Bob. The problem is that the rainbow groups or the Inside Out, they actually are supporting students to bring in rainbow clubs, lunchtime clubs. So it may not be in the curriculum, in the classrooms, but there's something called a hidden curriculum. And it's what that is as teachers, we're teaching the curriculum in the daily classroom, but we don't see some of the stuff that's going on all the time around us, right? And that's the same in the playground, the conversations that students are having, which is why, the bullying thing is important, that we do know what's going on. But this is, these lunchtime groups, that's actually quite extreme, especially in the high schools. And that's why we have a lot of people now walking around identifying as something else. And I'll talk to you about that very soon, because it's hugely concerning. Actually, I might go straight there now.
Well,
unless you
just
want
on
to
that point of trust, can I I think the turning point on the trust issue was that one of the advantages of COVID lockdown is that for the first time, parents actually were watching and seeing the type of material that was being taught. And that was a huge wake up for some parents, because, you send your kids off to school and they do their homework privately and you really don't know what the curriculum is. Suddenly for Aucklanders, it felt like, 3 years. But, for a lot of the country, we were all in lockdown and we were actually engaging with our children a lot more and seeing the homework that they were doing and watching it online. And it was a huge wake up call. I think, in my view, it was a bit of a turning point. That's where I think a lot of trust was lost. And unfortunately, that's got to be rebuilt. And the way to rebuild it is for the education system and the Ministry of Education to start focusing on what parents are expecting their children to have, which is preparation for the real world. And that's in the area of reading, writing, and arithmetic, those practical skills. It's not about whether they identify under the 112 genders or 200 plus sexualities, but that seems to be what the obsession is with at the moment. And I mean, it's not only Pink Shirt Day coming up, it's, there's a week coming up, Pride Week for New Zealand schools. Now, most New Zealand schools will have nothing to do with it because most teachers are just trying to get through the curriculum because they're actually professionals focusing on the real issues. But there will be some schools that will push it. And, I think it becomes a major problem when, especially, for example, on Pink Shirt Day, where kids are bullied because they're not part of Pink Shirt. They haven't worn the pink shirt, which is kind of ironic, isn't it? And that, so you're not supposed to bully, but it's okay to bully if someone's a transphobe or a biphobe that's the message we got from the Posey Parker debacle, sadly. And I think that too was actually a wake up call for actually New Zealanders, because they had heard that a certain group were the victims the whole time, and then suddenly they saw actually they're not the victims. They're actually the ones who are not willing to simply allow some open debate on this issue. And the media, most of the mainstream media, to their shame, have pushed this narrative, and we saw the ugly side of it at the Posey Parker rally. So I think there's been a good waking up, actually, Helen. I think there has been a bit of a turning point. All the research we've done asking parents whether they think children should be taught that they can just choose their gender, and whether they should be taught this radical material, sexuality and gender, the majority of New Zealanders don't want that in schools. And, what you do as adults, that is adult material. But this targeting of children younger and younger, as young as 7 and even younger, the drag queens going to libraries, it's all part of the sexualization. It's the hypersexualization of our culture. And then we wonder why our kids are so stressed.
Absolutely, 100%. Where is the child protection? So for me, I'm aiming to get to Parliament, and one of the first things I will be doing is making sure that we are legislating child protection. And at this point, all they've got is around orangata mariki, that kind of protection services. But we're talking about, media, we're talking about literature even that people are pushing. So there's a lot of protection that we need to discuss as a nation, what we are pushing on our children, which is age, inappropriate for their age, and, like you said, highly sexualized content. I'll just mention a couple of the comments here. Where are we? I like this one. You'll like this, Bob. So we've got Joanne, who likes my braids. Now, I wore these purposefully, and we probably don't need to explain why, but that's why I did it, because, I braid my hair. I also knit and crochet, and I teach a whole lot of women to do that. And
I bet you're on Pinterest and Instagram as well.
As a teacher,
you are the queen of disinformation, according to the Disinformation Project. You are down this deep rabbit hole of Nazi conspiracism.
Apparently, yeah. So we've got Charmaine, who talked about the anti-smacking bill never stopped those physically abusing children. She's so right, Charmaine. it's becoming illegal to affirm your own child's biological. Oh yeah, so good. Here we got Pauline. Love you guys. Oh, that's nice. Love you guys. You are another lifeboat. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Pauline. Where are we? Everyone has to go along with the woke ideologies. Yeah, well, that's pretty much what it's like, even at university, you know, the way they're pushing it. I see pride. They've got massive pride stuff coming up there at university. Now, it's okay to respect each other, but it's not the other way around. It's like this one view, right? Ellen, what's Ellen got to say? This movement is top down, not a grassroots. Yeah, correct. We're fighting a Hydra. Please look into the work of Jennifer. Yes, I have heard of those people. Thank you, Ellen. Well done, you guys. This is so sad. Yep, another grassroots there. Where are we? It will help to get the Islamic Council of Women speaking about this. True. I wonder how informed they are. Yeah, I have.
Well, the interesting point that Ellen makes there is that the Islamic schools have not been challenged about their statement of faith and their views on some of these sexuality and gender issues, and yet Christian schools like Bethlehem College are public enemy number one. So, I mean, Alan raises a very good point in that this is selective, and this is a anti-Christian focus, because basically that has been the moral anchor of this country, because that's what our laws have been based around. You know, we are a Judeo-Christian country, and so that's public enemy number one if you're trying to drive a hypersexualized, hedonistic, narcissistic culture into New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely. Where are we? Angela. I'll just show a couple more and then we'll get on to the next question and we'll come back to the audience.
Oh, yeah.
Is this new curriculum going to become from? Oh, you've done that one. Oh,
I like her. I like Angela's profile thing. Proud to be a real woman.
Oh, nice.
Did you see that?
I want a t-shirt. I want a t-shirt. Hey, Rebecca, two of my favorite humans. There you go.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca. You need more friends, Rebecca.
No way. She's cool. I hung out with her for a little while up in Tauranga. She's an awesome chick. Sarah, where are you? A lot of parents haven't got a clue what is being taught to our children, and a lot are dismissing facts when they're told. They're in complete denial. Look, yes and no. Like Bob said, people are, there's a lot more parents that know now, but yes, there's probably still a few that are unaware. Even when I first put the petition out, one of my teaching colleagues actually messaged me and told me that she did respect me, but she didn't think that what I was talking about was a big issue. But this is 4 years on, and there's a lot more teachers now really concerned. We talked about resist gender education. They are ex-teachers who put together that, and I know for a fact that one of them was involved in the rollout, and at the time she was, you know, a bit hoodwinked as well with the whole inclusive kindness thing, but yeah, clearly not now, and they can see the dangerous. So we've got Therese there. We have Pink Shirt Day at work on Friday, but I refuse to do it. Good on you, Therese. This is about what, you know, pushing back if it's not something that you agree on. You can say that you want to support no bullying without having to go into the whole LGBT thing. Shirley, I noticed that they changed the ad from trans community to young children. I'm not sure what ad.
That's referring to Pink Shirt Day. I think it's a bit of both, actually, because it features Chanel Lal and another person from the trans community, but yes, there is young children as well. Actually, I've noticed that as well, Shirley. They, on the website, they've tried to be a little bit more subtle and gone a bit more wider with the bullying. But what you do is when you dig into the teachers' resources, you find out that the funding is going to Inside Out. Primarily, that's one of the major groups. And the other thing is that if you go to the teachers' resource, it talks about keeping the mahi going. What do we do after Pink Shirt Day? And it's all about establishing rainbow groups, checking the rainbow policies in the school. Sorry, I shouldn't use the word rainbow, LGBT, because I don't want to change the definition of rainbow and its meaning. LGBT, it's all about that. So it's quite clear what the agenda is. It's very subtle. And back to that original comment about a lot of parents don't know, for anybody watching, it's easy to remember, sexeducation.nz. Just go to sexeducation.nz, read our fact sheet. Your eyes will be wide opened, and then just share it. And it's a wake-up call to parents, because they finally understand just how insidious this curriculum is.
Yes, thank you, Bob. Now, this next bit, you might not know about this. It's quite nice to think I know something that you don't know yet, but this is something that you need to know, and it's pretty shocking for all the parents out there. There's a new report that's just out in the UK where it has been found 1 in 10 school children want to change their gender or have already done so. 1 in 10. And now this is why we're alarmed, and this is why we have called for caution. Obviously, the UK is a wee bit further on than New Zealand, but do we want to get to this point? 1 in 10 children, we are messing up. So with this in mind, in the UK Prime Minister has ordered an urgent review into the inappropriate and graphic material taught to school children. What message, Bob, do you give to parents to help them talk to their local MPs? And secondly, how long do you think it will be before New Zealand follows suit?
Well, the first thing is just to correct the misunderstanding or the perception that politicians can solve this problem. Actually, the politicians have created this problem. They've fallen asleep, and they've either pushed this agenda or they're asleep at the wheel while it's being pushed, with a few exceptions that I could name on one hand, basically, in Parliament at the moment. You just had to look at the vote for the conversion therapy law, which took away the freedom to, get counselling according to your will. Was it seven national MPs were the only brave ones? Now, what was the 1 in 10. Actually, I did know about that, and I read it this morning, and I wasn't surprised, because yesterday I did a McBlog on the fact that 1 in 4 teenagers in the US identify as LGBT. But that sounds quite dramatic, and it sounds, wow, isn't that great that we have so many less heterosexuals? But when you dig down into the research, you actually find that only about 3 or 4% are gay and lesbian. The rest are either bisexual, because that's pretty cool. I mean, basically, you can bat on either side, and it's cool to say you're bisexual, or they're questioning, and questioning means that apparently you're LGBT, even though most kids are not sexually active. In fact, more than 85% of teenagers are not currently sexually active, contrary to the myth that everyone's doing it. So what you got to understand is that kids are very impressionable. They like the likes. They like to be part of minority groups. They like to push back. They want to be different. And when they're being told that there are not only male and female, but there's actually 112 other options. And when they're told, and when they're told that actually having a boyfriend or a girlfriend is just one of 200 plus options, then of course kids are going to say, oh yeah, actually changing my sex, that sounds great. Yeah, I don't mind taking a few puberty blockers. That means I get to cut my hair short. It means that I get to hang around. It means I get to play in another sport that maybe the boys do or the girls do. I like playing rugby, but none of my girlfriends do. So, maybe I should become a boy, or, I like ballet, but gee, my mates give me a hard time. So maybe I'll identify as a girl. Actually, 1 in 10, I actually thought that was actually quite low, to be honest. Because when you think about it, the kids are just being indoctrinated that they need to be choosing their gender and they need to be choosing their sexuality. I don't think we should be surprised when they're actually verbalizing that. The good news is the research shows that when children continue to grow and mature, and especially when they go through puberty, the biological reality of puberty reinforces actually who they are as male and female. And so we need to, that's what they call watchful waiting. That's what any decent counsellor or professional will talk about watchful waiting. Because here's the thing, Helen, if you go to the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual for determining gender dysphoria, it actually says, it lists about 10 things, and you need to identify that a child has at least 6 of these identifying things. And it generally talks about a persistence. It talks about the fact that they're going through stress. There's a number of factors that a decent medical professional will diagnose before they come to that conclusion. It's a bit like saying a kid turns up and they keep fidgeting and they say, oh, well, gee, obviously you've got ADHD.
ADHD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or,
I know we've done those checklists at school all the time.
Yeah. And so what you're doing is you're saying to children, gee, do you want to be the other sex? And some kids say, oh, okay, that sounds pretty cool. I'll be part of that minority group. And so...
Yeah, I agree with you, Bob. This is like alarming for 2 reasons. The first one is the fact that, 1 in 10 children, what are they actually being influenced by? What are they being, pushed at school onto them as why this is not a real indication of that they are the opposite gender, of course. Like you said, that will change, 80%, but that's only if they're not interfered with, or if the schools are not pushing it. But this is a problem. The schools are pushing it, or some of them. The ministry are pushing this, and so that's where we have to raise the alarm. And like the UK Prime Minister is, ordering that review. It's not just about the gender ideology. I shared last week some of that explicit graphic material that we're talking about, and I even use the terms, and people are like, Helen, don't say those things. But if you as an adult find that abhorrent to hear those words, how do you think your 13-year-old daughter and grandchildren they're listening to it in the classroom?
That was interesting. I don't know if you remember back in 2011 and 2012, there was a book that won the New Zealand Post Book of the Year for children called Into the River by Ted Dawes, and it was a book that had explicit, it had the C word, it had the F word, it had explicit sexual scenes described, and we pushed back on that and said it's simply not age appropriate, and yet this was given a children's book award. And there's other books like that. Last week we highlighted some books that the Library Association in America were upset because parents were kicking up a stink because it had explicit sexual content. So, I think the point you're making is really important, is that this isn't an anti-LGBT approach. This is simply about letting kids grow up with a sense of moral and sexual innocence, and waiting until they're adults before they start making these key decisions that affect their lives. Stop indoctrinating them with critical theory and radical sexuality and gender ideology. That's what your petition is saying, and that's what we should be saying to schools, because it's messing up with the minds of our kids, and that's why they're becoming so stressed.
Absolutely. The anxiety is huge. I've heard of so many students who find this really uncomfortable to have to sit through these lessons. We had a boys' high school student who emailed me. Mostly I get messages from parents, but an actual student, told me he's fed up with having all this rainbow stuff shoved in his face throughout the school, with whether it's a flag flying, they have to do assemblies, activism, the whole works. It's like, I could go on about it for hours, but I'm just going to change tactic now, because I know that we talk a lot about supporting the parents, and as we should. There's still lots of questions which we'll get to, but there's just one more question before we go to Q&A. We have talked a lot about parents and what they can do. What about teaching staff who do not want to teach the RSE, but their schools are pushing it? How can they get support, not just to oppose this in their school environment, but with the Teaching Council and the Ministry of Education? Because surely the parents are doing a lot of opposing, and so are we, but there's teachers out there who don't want this. There's really good teachers who are leaving the profession, even the young ones coming in through teacher training now are being, this is professional development, rainbow tick training. I saw a young teacher recently who thanked me for what I'm doing because she said she's got 3 students. Now, this is New Zealand, 3 students in her class that want to be the opposite sex, and they want her to call them that. Now, she told them that they need to bring in a letter signed by their parents. But, this is real. This is happening. I know that, we've said not all schools will teach it, but it's happening in that hidden curriculum where the students are talking about it, whether it's through Rainbow school lunchtime thing, whether it's all the influences on social media, which is another factor that we have to address at some point. So what do we suggest to, I'm sure there's teachers out there watching or who will watch at some point, how can we help them?
Well, I wouldn't put any, unfortunately, I wouldn't put any trust in either the Teachers Council or the unions or the Ministry of Education. They are leftist organisations who will be quite happy with this indoctrination, and in fact are probably pushing it privately. So there has, and in fact, the Ministry of Education guidelines say that, students should be referred to with their preferred pronouns. And in fact, you can keep that hidden from parents if the child requests it. So parents do not even, that is explicitly stated in the Ministry of Education guidelines that parents do not need to be informed. So you really need to find other professionals in your school setting who feel the same as you, and that'll be a subtle way of just asking around, are you comfortable with teaching this material? I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of schools are simply ignoring a lot of this material. A lot of parents are saying, well, fortunately, they're not using this material. They've got some good programs that are coming in, and there are some good programs like the attitude programs with the Parenting Place. One group that we have had some time for is Nest Consulting. They have gone a little bit into the gender ideology, so you need to be a little bit careful.
I was going to say, are you sure? I was going to say, are you sure? Because that's one on my watch list. So
yeah, they've got a Puberty Plus program at year 6 and 7. Although I still go back to parents and I say, actually, it's got nothing to do with the schools about this issue. Send it back to parents. So, our bottom line is we just say to parents, you just don't want your child involved in any of these programs because it's a parent's role. And so if you go to our parent guide, you'll actually see a default letter that you can write to make sure that your children aren't part of those. And the school is legally obliged to make sure that your child is supervised and send them to the library. Although, of course, Helen, you might want to go to the school library and check what books they've got in the school library just in case, because we've done a series on that as well. So, I mean, this goes back to the trust thing, is that where we used to trust schools to be on side with families and the values, I don't think we can anymore. And that's a sad indictment, and it's a sad thing to say. But my message to parents is don't hope for the best. Do some research. But back to your question about teachers, teachers need to basically find other teachers. I think if they're under pressure to teach this material and it goes against their values, or they're being pressured to use preferred pronouns which go against telling the biological truth. I mean, it's one thing to call a person a different name because it's just a name and it's not a biological lie, but the preferred pronouns issue is an issue. Hiding it from parents, I think, if a teacher has to lie to a parent, if, for example, the parent asks some information, that's problematic. So that's where a teacher really needs to get some legal advice or contact us. But I would encourage them to speak to other professionals, because I know that the majority of teachers have got into the teaching profession because they want to teach and prepare kids for the real world, not for an ideological, sexual and gender ideology type world that the ministry seems so obsessed on. So, find some allies in your school community and amongst the professionals in your area.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. That's really good. And you're right. Most teachers, the goal that was right throughout my teaching career was one of our codes of keeping a safe learning environment for all students, and I carried that with me. because of this, though, I knew that I wasn't doing that anymore if I was teaching this now. What you say, though, is problematic with the Teaching Council, because with the Citizens Initiative referendum, I had pushback and a lot of opposition from the Teaching Council, from the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Justice, PPTA, Secretary of Education. Now, in the letter that they responded to it, it's basically you comply or you face discipline. That's what that says. Okay, so teachers know that they're going to face discipline if they oppose any of this. So it is a tough one, because there's really good teachers out there. So I thank you for your advice to them. We need to deal with the Teaching Council and the Ministry of Education, and the only way to do that, well, it's not the only way, but it is politics, and we need some good people to stand up in Parliament, because there's nobody, Bob, we even talked about the woman thing early when you identified as a male. There's nobody actually standing up against that and defending, actually verbally saying, defending what a woman is, talking against this gender stuff. So even the Minister of Women, you haven't heard boo out of her. You hear a tiny little bit out of her at the moment around education, but that's a whole nother, she's there's some very airy-fairy statements coming out there. But look, I'm aware that we have got some people here, and thank you to the audience. Great attendance there. I'll just go through some. So who did you speak to?
That's a problem. I was just Googling who was the Minister for Women, because I actually couldn't remember. Of course, it's Jan Tinetti.
Jan Tinetti.
Jan Tinetti was the one who shepherded through the birth certificate bill, which basically has turned the birth certificate into a complete ideological piece of rubbish paper, because you can change the gender on your birth certificate and tell a biological lie, and you can do it a number of times. I mean,
yeah, well, be sure to tune in.
You wouldn't want Jan Tinetti taking biology in for your kids, because they'd be totally confused. I mean, she does not exude any confidence as a Minister of Education. Minister for Women, has she been asked to define what a woman is? She'd probably just giggle, wouldn't she?
Actually, yeah, because she's doing a lot of giggling about education and the state of it.
And truancy officers.
Yeah, and it's getting better apparently, but there's
if any of your listeners could put that question to Jan Tinetti, what is a woman? Because I don't know if you saw the Queensland Minister for Women in Australia just recently, my friend Rachel Wong, who's with Women's Forum in Australia, she was highlighting on her social media the Minister for Queensland for Women, and was asked what a woman is, and basically said a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman. Apparently, unbelievable.
That's a real letdown for a woman. I mean, it's it's actually worse than our Prime Minister. That was bad enough. But so we've got here, Sarah, many parents aren't going to send their children to school on Pride Week. Hope nobody goes. I feel we really need to push back. Completely correct there. Where are we? Sorry, Vulnerable Children's Act. Yeah, that's one thing that I have looked into, the Vulnerable Children's Act, but it's more around oranga tamariki situations that we do. That's why I said we need to strengthen it and add a lot more to that. I'll just see if I've missed anything. I sat on the rotunda. Yep, so Albert Park, sat on the rotunda with Helen. Pauline. And it cured me of MSN. I seek other news sources now. Well done, Pauline. It's insane. Chanel Lau is getting Pink Shirt Day. Yeah. Well, clearly you are, because you're watching this panel. And nice to see you there, Pauline. Great to meet some of the people that I didn't even know before on the rotunda. Right. Where are we? Virginia, yes. And the key issue is that parents can remove their children from the relationship and sexuality program if a dedicated course and not spread throughout the whole. Yeah, that's right. So it's spread everywhere. Bob, I shared last time about an assembly, a coming out assembly. It was more like a drag show than a school assembly. So it is everywhere. It's not just in, just remove yourself from a lesson. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Angela said that I've withdrawn my grandchildren from any sexuality, health, safety classes, which is all good with their principal. But I've also asked that they receive conventional tuition at that time, not just poked in the library. Yeah, good one. Well done. See, this is what we need. And I know, she's a grandparent, so well done. Is there anything that you can see jump out at you there? Oh, Dixon, hang on.
Yeah, just so you know, the law says that they just need to be supervised. But yeah, I would ask for some level of continued academic training, but protecting your children is the most important factor. And unfortunately, it may mean that you need to keep them home for the day, because I think one of the concerns for children is that they're excluded, and so they're made to look the exception. I mean, my argument has always been, with Bible in schools, it's now opt-in. They've changed it so that you've got to opt in to Bible in schools. And I've actually said sex education should be opt-in as well, that parents have to actually opt their children into it if they want it, because then you give the freedom to parents to make that decision for what they want for their children. But it's not by default, and it's not the sneaky behind closed doors not being honest. That actually, Helen, that's one thing I would really warn parents about, is that if as a parent you go to the school and you simply ask to see the material, and if you get mucked around and they're not willing to show you the full curriculum, that is an immediate red flag. If the school is not completely transparent about what is being taught and who is being taught, assume the worst. Because the reason they're not being transparent is because they know you're not going to like it. So that's my word of advice for tonight.
Yeah, so right. Thank you. Just anything else there's quite a lot of comments here, so I really apologize to the audience if we can't get to them all. Where are we? Helena, OMG, she's a member minister. Yeah, I know Helena, right? She's running the education system and Us Women. Oh, dear. Helma. Oh, Helma, great to see you. I feel for the parents on Struggle Street. They often are so busy, yeah, true, and not aware of what the curriculum is. Education needs to be back to reading, writing. I agree completely. Back to basics, absolutely, 100%. You're right. So I've been advocating to, as a teacher, I advocate to people to homeschool now, and that's because of the lack of trust I have with what's going on. But as Helma said, not everybody can do that. It's a real struggle to have to, and we shouldn't have to. This is a state public school that your taxes, actually, make a point of this, you are paying for all the education that your children are receiving. You're paying for these lobby groups that are coming in, pushing this relationship, sexuality guideline stuff. So, yeah, you can do better, clearly. Bob, really appreciate you being here this week. Is there anything else you wanted to add before I talk about what we are doing next week? Would you want to come back another week?
I have to check my diary. Actually, I was just chuckling to myself because I just had a look at the screen and I noticed that there's a big bold logo saying Real Woman NZ right next to my head. And I just want to reiterate that I don't qualify, and I never will, and I don't want to.
You don't think for a bit of fun just for today you'd like to identify as a woman? No,
but what I will identify as is a real man who knows what a woman is.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you run for Prime Minister then?
I'll
tell you what, I'll talk to Ted and I'll bring you in as my co-leader. Oops, I hope he's not watching. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Look, good one. So next week, Bob, and I know that you're busy, and I know that Monday you have your show, but like I said, it's great that we can all tune into different programs now. So next week, actually partway through last year, Katrina Biggs, who was on the panel earlier when we first started, her, myself, and another person met with Christchurch City Council around Women's Only Swimming Day, Bob. So going back to what you first started the session off today with, we met with the city council talking about the fact that there were women really concerned that this campaign that they had, where it was Women's Only Day, they didn't let the women know that this also included people who could identify as women. So we had trans in there as well. And so we went to advocate for a lot of these women who were going. Would you believe, after a bit of back and forth, they still haven't got back to us? Now, it's really timely that this is also happening down in Invercargill. And so next week, Bob, we have got Katrina coming on, and we're going to discuss what happened in the meeting with Christchurch City Council, but we're also trying to get the lady who, do you want to share a little bit about that now, what you were?
Yeah, we had the couple, and in fact, I could give you a contact for one of those. So we had Rachel and Terry, and they were both involved with the public meeting. They had about 100 there with the Invercargill City Council. The policy is that anybody who identifies as women is allowed to go into the ladies' changing room, and there was massive pushback from this group of 100 community members. The council's argument is that they can't discriminate and they're following the Human Rights Act. But what most people don't know is that the word gender is not actually in the Human Rights Act. What advocates and activists have done is they've implied that you can't discriminate on the basis of sex also applies to gender identification. That is not actually specifically correct, and that is why you will see activist groups are actually wanting the law to be changed to make it explicit, and that's why we need to monitor that one. So what was the latest? I think they've got another meeting coming up, and so we were able to just highlight that. So if you go to bobmccoskrie.com, you can actually just watch that interview that I did with the two ladies from Invercargill. They're really fighting for it. They're very stroppy about it, and good on them, because they're basically speaking up for the protection of families and of young girls, vulnerable girls, people who have been victims of sexual abuse. They don't want biological men, no matter how they identify, in their changing room. And as a man, I can completely understand that. And as a father of two daughters, I totally get that. And I think we've lost Helen. So does that make me the host of the show? Here she comes back.
You really wanted to be the host of a woman's show.
I was just about to sign off on behalf of all the men, saying "Go woman."
Cool. So as I said, we've got Katrina on next week with we'll be talking about the Christchurch City Council, as well as one down in Invercargill, and the week after that we're talking about sex self-ID, Bob, so you might want to tune in as well. That's in your busy schedule. Thank you so much, Bob, for being here. Fantastic. You've been so helpful, given lots of really good wisdom and advice. So hopefully you might come back on another point, because we've still got heaps to talk about, as you know, because you have a lot of this information even more than I do. But thank you to the audience out there. We'll see ASEAN back next week, and maybe even Bronnie. And that way there'll be 3 women back here, not just the one of us and a male. But it was nice to have a male on.
Good. Okay. Anytime. And keep up the good work. It's great. Love the work you're doing. Got to speak up.
Thanks. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, Bob.
Okay. See you.